Empress Matilda, born in 1102, the central figure in the civil conflict known as the Anarchy, which erupted after her father, King Henry I of England, died without an heir. Named his successor, Matilda's ascension was thwarted by her cousin Stephen, who claimed the throne for himself, igniting a prolonged battle for control. Throughout her struggle, she managed to assert her authority in parts of England and came close to being crowned, though she never fully secured the monarchy. A resolution came when Stephen agreed to name Matilda's son, Henry II, as his successor, effectively establishing the Plantagenet dynasty. But there is so much more to her story, and you're about to learn all about it. Hello and welcome to the channel. If it's your first time here, good to meet you, and if you're coming back, great to see you again. As always, if you want to support the channel, you're already doing it. The best way to support is just by enjoying the content. Those who want to go above and beyond can like, subscribe, or take a look in the description. You'll find where you want to go. Now, without further ado, please get nice and relaxed and comfortable, and we can begin our biography of Empress Matilda. Matilda, the daughter of Henry I of England and Matilda of Scotland, was likely born on February the 7th, 1102, at Sutton Courtenay in Berkshire. Her birth linked her to significant royal lineages, as her father was the youngest son of William the Conqueror, who established an Anglo-Norman elite across England and Wales after his 1066 invasion. Her mother, Matilda of Scotland, descended from the West Saxon royal family, which included Alfred the Great, enhancing Henry I's legitimacy as king. Raised in a court connected deeply with the Kingdom of France's political sphere, Matilda had one legitimate brother, William Adeline, and approximately 22 illegitimate siblings, a resultant of her father's multiple liaisons. Her early life details, of course, are sparse, but she likely received her education from her mother, focusing on literacy and religious principles. Among the notable figures at court were her uncle, David, who would later become the King of Scotland, and her cousin, Stephen of Blois, as well as influential nobles like her half-brother Robert of Gloucester and Brian Viscount. In 1108, during one of Henry's trips to Normandy, he entrusted Matilda and William Adeline to the care of Anselm, the Archbishop of Canterbury, a close confidant of her mother. Contemporary accounts are vague about Matilda's physical appearance, often generically describing her as beautiful, which was a pretty common practice, a default among chroniclers to reflect nobility rather than personal observation. Of course, no one was very rushed or keen to describe a royal as not beautiful. Could perhaps invite some unwelcome circumstances. Well, in late 1108, or perhaps 1109, Henry V of Germany proposed marriage to Matilda through envoys sent to Normandy and a direct letter to her mother. The alliance was advantageous for King Henry I of England, providing his daughter with a prestigious connection and securing an ally against France. Henry V would gain a substantial dowry to fund his coronation as Holy Roman Emperor. Negotiations finalized in the June of 1109, marking Matilda's entrance into significant political proceedings. By October, she attended her first royal council, and by February 1110, she departed for Germany. Matilda and Henry V met in Liege, proceeding to Utrecht for their official betrothal on April the 10th, 1110, followed by Matilda's crowning as German Queen in Mainz on July 25th. At the time of their betrothal, Matilda was only 8, while Henry was 24. While her education in German customs and governance was overseen by Bruno, the Archbishop of Trier. Thus their official marriage took place in January of 1114 in Worms, amidst grand celebrations, after which Matilda became actively involved in German imperial affairs. Henry's arrest of Archbishop Adalbert of Mainz, among others soon after their marriage, precipitated political unrest and rebellions, culminating in his excommunication by Pope Pascal II. In 1116, the imperial couple crossed the Alps to confront the Pope in Italy, asserting control over northern Italy by early 1117 and advancing on Rome. The Pope fled, and in his absence, the papal envoy Maurice Bodin, later the anti-pope Gregory VIII, crowned them in St. Peter's Basilica during Easter and again at Pentecost. These ceremonies were contentious, primarily formal, crown-wearing rather than true imperial coronations, and complicated by Bodin's excommunication and subsequent deposition. Despite these ambiguities, Matilda claimed and was likely recognized as empress from 1117 onward. Her title was generally accepted by chanceries and chroniclers, and she used the epithet empress consistently throughout her remaining life. In 1118, as Henry V ventured back to Germany to quell renewed uprisings, he appointed Matilda as his regent in Italy, marking her first significant experience in governance, although specific records from this period are sparse. By 1119, she rejoined Henry in Lotharingia, as he negotiated a resolution to his excommunication by the Church. Their presence at the Council of Worms in 1122 highlighted another pivotal moment, where Henry relinquished his rights to invest bishops with their religious symbols, settling a long-standing ecclesiastical dispute. Matilda's attempt to visit England in 1122 to potentially discuss her succession was thwarted by Charles I of Flanders, blocking her route. This journey, suggested by historian Marjorie Chibnall, may have been intended to solidify her claims on the English crown, excuse me. Well, the imperial couple at this time had remained childless, a situation attributed by contemporaries to Henry's sins rather than a question of fertility. Of course, science had not quite caught up to superstition. Well, Henry's health declined quite early, actually, by 1122, reportedly afflicted with cancer, and he died in May 1125 in Utrecht. His death left Matilda under the protection of her nephew Frederick, the heir to Henry's estates, and Matilda still held the imperial insignia. However, Archbishop Adelbert persuaded her to hand over these symbols, and he facilitated the election of Lothair of Supplinburg as the new king, a choice that signaled a significant shift away from Henry's allies. Facing limited prospects at the age of 23, and without children to claim a regency, Matilda was presented with the choice of joining a convent or remarrying. Opting against further political entanglements in Germany, she decided to return to Normandy, relinquishing her German estates. She left with personal treasures, including her imperial regalia and significant relics, signaling a definitive end to her political life in the Holy Roman Empire and a return to her roots in Normandy. The tragic White Ship disaster in 1120 drastically altered English succession landscape. You see, the ship carrying around 300 people, including Matilda's brother, William Adelin, and many nobles, sank near Barfleur, Normandy. It was likely due to overcrowding, but apparently the crew's intoxication did not help things. Indeed, they had all gotten way too drunk, including the captain. The disaster claimed nearly all on board, including William, leaving the succession uncertain. Probably best that the drunken crew had went down with the ship. One can hardly imagine the fate in store for them if they had have survived. They would have wished they were certainly dead. Well, in Western Europe, succession rules varied, with male primogeniture gaining favor in parts of France, where the eldest son typically inherited titles. But unlike the French kings who crowned their successors during their lifetimes to clarify succession lines, England had no such tradition. This left a pool of legitimate heirs to contest the throne after a king's death, a situation compounded by the tumultuous Anglo-Norman successions of the past 6 decades, starting with William the Conqueror back in 1066. Following William Adelin's death, King Henry I's immediate solution was to father another son. His first wife, Matilda of Scotland, however, had died back in 1118, and his subsequent marriage to Adeliza of Lorraine did not produce any children, casting doubt on the royal lineage's future. Henry considered various nephews as potential heirs. Stephen of Blois, son of Henry's sister Adela, emerged as a contender, especially after Henry arranged Stephen's marriage to Matilda I of Boulogne, Empress Matilda's affluent cousin. Another nephew, Theobald IV of Blois, also seemed a likely candidate. However, William Clito, son of Robert Curthose and favored by King Louis VI of France, was unsuitable due to his rebellion against Henry. Henry may have contemplated his illegitimate son Robert of Gloucester as a successor, but such a choice would have clashed with the English norms of favoring legitimate succession. Thus, the Emperor's death in 1125, Empress Matilda's husband, reshaped Henry's plans, bringing Matilda into the line of potential heirs as she returned to Normandy, possibly to assert her claim and stabilize the royal succession. After returning to Normandy in 1125, she spent about a year at the royal court, where her father, Henry I, hoped his second marriage would produce the male heir required. However, in preparation for the possibility that it may not, Henry designated Matilda as his successor, provided he had no other legitimate sons. Thus, at a gathering in Westminster on December of 1126, the Anglo-Norman barons were convened, and in January of 1127 they swore to recognize Matilda and any of her future legitimate heirs as rightful successors. In early 1127, Henry started seeking a new husband for Matilda, considering various European princes. His favored choice was Geoffrey, the eldest son of Count Fulk V of Anjou. The strategic alliance aimed to secure Normandy's southern borders, particularly as Henry faced threats from his nephew William Clito, supported by the French king from the east. The earlier alliance plan with Anjou through William Adelin had collapsed with his death in the White Ship disaster. The dispute over the dowry from that failed marriage had driven Fulk towards supporting William Clito, while Henry's new strategy was to realign with Anjou by marrying Matilda off to Geoffrey. As far as Matilda, though, she was initially reluctant to be so quick to marry Geoffrey, feeling that it demeaned her imperial status, given that Geoffrey was merely a count's son, and also much younger than she was, Matilda being 25 and Geoffrey being 13 at the time. However, after persuasion by Hildebert, the Archbishop of Tours, Matilda consented to the engagement. She travelled to Rouen in May of 1127, accompanied by her half-brother Robert of Gloucester and her supporter Brian Fitzcount, where she was formally betrothed to Geoffrey. Thus the marriage took place on the 17th of June 1128 in Le Mans, conducted by the bishops of Le Mans and Serres. Shortly thereafter, Fulk set off for Jerusalem, aiming to secure a kingship there, and officially left Geoffrey as the Count of Anjou and Maine in 1129. This marriage, though initially met with resistance from Matilda, was crucial in solidifying political alliances and securing the southern flank of Normandy. The marriage between Matilda and Geoffrey of Anjou was marked by discord from the outset, as personal and political tensions surfaced soon after their union. Matilda was granted castles in Normandy as part of her dowry, yet it remained unclear when the couple would again gain actual control over these assets. Furthermore, Henry did not clearly define Geoffrey's political claims on England or Normandy, likely maintaining ambiguity about his son-in-law's status intentionally. The relationship deteriorated to the point where Matilda left Geoffrey and returned to Normandy. Although initially blaming Geoffrey for the marital strife, Henry I eventually facilitated their reconciliation in 1131. Following a summons from her father, Matilda travelled to England, and at a council meeting it was resolved that she would return to her husband, and was reaffirmed as Henry's heir. Matilda gave birth to her first son, the future Henry II, in March of 1133 in Le Mans, which delighted Henry I, who visited her in Rouen. In 1134, she endured a perilous delivery of their second son, Geoffrey, in Rouen. During this critical time she clashed with her father over her burial preferences, though she eventually recovered. As Henry's health began to wane, tensions escalated. Matilda and Geoffrey, feeling unsupported in their claim to the English throne, demanded that Henry transfer control of the royal castles in Normandy to them, and secure an immediate oath of allegiance from the Norman nobility. Henry's refusal, fueled by fears of Geoffrey's ambitions in Normandy, led to a rebellion in the region, which the couple supported militarily. Henry I's unexpected illness and subsequent death in 1135 near Lyon-à-Forêt threw the succession into uncertainty. The exact details of his final wishes remain unclear, with conflicting accounts from contemporary sources. Some suggested that Henry reaffirmed his intention to bequeath all his lands to Matilda, while others contended that he expressed regret over coercing the baron's allegiance to her. This ambiguity set the stage for the ensuing succession crisis, and a period of civil war in England known as the Anarchy. As news of Henry's death spread, Matilda and Geoffrey were actively engaged in military campaigns in Anjou, supporting rebels against royal forces. Many barons who could have supported Matilda's claim to the English throne were bound by an oath to remain in Normandy until Henry was properly interred, limiting their ability to aid her immediately. Matilda and Geoffrey capitalized on the situation by seizing key castles in southern Normandy, part of Matilda's contested dowry, but were halted by robust resistance from Norman nobles and faced a rebellion back in Anjou. Meanwhile, Stephen of Blois, positioned in Boulogne and a contender for the English throne, raced back to England. Despite initial resistance at key ports, he managed to reach London by the 8th of December. His timely arrival, coupled with promises of rights and privileges to Londoners, helped him secure the support of the city and his brother Henry of Blois, the influential Bishop of Winchester. Stephen quickly overturned his previous oath to support Matilda, claiming Henry I had rescinded his decision on his deathbed. His source? Trust me, bro. By December 22nd, Stephen was crowned king at Westminster Abbey. Back in Normandy, discussions about the nobility supporting Theobald, Stephen's elder son, as king, quickly dissolved when news of Stephen's coronation reached them. The Normans, preferring a unified rule over England and Normandy, withdrew their support for Theobald in favor of Stephen. Matilda was undeterred. She continued her efforts from Argentan, where she gave birth to her third son, William, in July of 1136. She maintained her court near the Norman border, bolstering her position with loyal knights, although she sought papal support from the Bishop of Angers. These attempts were seemingly unsuccessful. Geoffrey's military actions in Normandy were aggressive, characterized by raids rather than attempts to secure lasting control. In response, Stephen returned to Normandy in 1137 to forge an alliance with King Louis VI of France and Theobald to counteract Angevin influence. However, internal conflicts among Stephen's forces, followed by a desertion of Norman barons, led to the failure of his military campaign. Thus, a truce was negotiated, with Stephen agreeing to an annual payment to Geoffrey for peace. In England, Stephen's early reign appeared to be somewhat successful, with generous distributions of land and favours securing the loyalty of many. However, challenges loomed as David I of Scotland seized northern strongholds, prompting Stephen to negotiate a temporary settlement. Simultaneously, rebellions in South Wales and the southwest tested his control, with key figures like Baldwin de Redvers turning against him after being released from captivity, further complicating Stephen's rule. In 1138, the political landscape of England was drastically altered when Robert of Gloucester, Matilda's influential half-brother, renounced his allegiance to King Stephen and declared his support for Matilda's claim to the English throne. This act of defiance marked the beginning of a civil war and triggered widespread regional rebellions across the southwest of England and Kent, though Robert remained in Normandy during this period. His declaration significantly reinvigorated Matilda's campaign, which had been relatively dormant since the death of Henry in 1135. Geoffrey of Anjou, seizing the opportunity presented by the destabilization in England, launched invasions into Normandy to expand his influence. Simultaneously, David of Scotland, asserting his support for Matilda, invaded northern England, pushing his forces into Yorkshire with the aim of cementing Matilda's claim. In response to these threats, Stephen concentrated his efforts on England rather than Normandy. He dispatched his wife, who was also named Matilda, to Kent with substantial resources to reclaim the strategic port of Dover from rebel control. Additionally, Stephen sent a small contingent of his household knights to the north to confront the Scots, culminating in their defeat at the Battle of the Standard. Despite this victory, David of Scotland maintained control over much of the north. Stephen then focused his military efforts on the west to regain control of Gloucestershire. His campaigns led him through the Welsh Marches, where he successfully took Hereford and Shrewsbury, and then southward to Bath. However, Bristol, the key rebel stronghold, resisted his efforts, and Stephen was forced to settle for raiding the surrounding area. The rebels had hoped for Robert of Gloucester's intervention, but he remained in Normandy, working to persuade Matilda to launch an invasion of England herself. Dover eventually capitulated to Queen Matilda's forces later in that year. By 1139, the preparations for an invasion by Matilda and Robert became more pronounced. Having secured much of Normandy, Geoffrey and Matilda began mobilizing forces for a cross-channel expedition to England. Earlier in the year, Matilda also sought to bolster her claim through the papacy. Bishop Ulger presented her legal argument for the throne, emphasizing her hereditary rights and the oaths previously sworn by the barons to support her succession. However, Arnulf of Lisieux, representing Stephen, contested her claim by questioning the legitimacy of Matilda's parentage. alleging that her mother had been a nun. Although the Pope maintained his support for Stephen, the proceedings underscored the legitimacy of the contention over Stephen's rule, positioning Matilda's claim as a credible challenge. Empress Matilda's long-awaited invasion of England commenced in the late summer of 1139, marking a critical escalation in her campaign to claim the English throne. The invasion was preceded by Baldwin de Redvere's attempt in August to secure Wareham as a landing port for Matilda's forces, but he was repelled by King Stephen's troops and retreated to the southwest. In a strategic shift, Matilda, invited by her stepmother, Queen Adeliza, landed at Arundel on the 30th of September, with Robert of Gloucester and a contingent of 140 knights. Matilda took refuge in Arundel Castle, while Robert marched northwest to ratify further support and join forces with Miles of Gloucester, who had declared his allegiance to Matilda. Stephen swiftly reacted by besieging Arundel Castle, effectively trapping Matilda within. However, under a truce brokered by his brother, Henry of Blois, Stephen surprisingly allowed Matilda's safe passage to the southwest, where she had the opportunity to reunite with her forces. The motives behind Stephen's decision remain debated. He may have recognized the tactical disadvantage of a prolonged siege at an impregnable location, or perhaps he simply acted out of a chivalric disposition, as it was unconventional to target women in warfare. Matilda established her court in Gloucester, maintaining a strategic distance from Bristol, yet close enough to coordinate with Robert of Gloucester. Despite limited defections to her cause, Matilda managed to hold a significant territory extending from Gloucester through the Thames Valley to Oxford and Wallingford. Her control also stretched into Devon, Cornwall, and Herefordshire, although her influence in these further regions was somewhat less certain. The conflict intensified as Stephen launched counterattacks, starting with the Wallingford Castle, a critical point along the Thames. Finding it well defended, he moved into Wiltshire, capturing several castles, but faced resistance from Miles of Gloucester, whose forces posed a direct threat to London. This compelled Stephen to abandon his western offensive and focus on securing his eastern territories. The political landscape of the conflict was further complicated in early 1140, when Nigel, Bishop of Ely, joined Matilda's side and attempted to establish a stronghold in East Anglia. Stephen's prompt and aggressive response forced Nigel to retreat back to Gloucester. Meanwhile, Robert of Gloucester managed to reclaim some territories lost in the previous year's campaigns, but certainly not all. Efforts to broker peace ensued with a conference at Bath, led by Henry of Blois. However, the peace talks disintegrated when the clergy, asserting a dominant role in the negotiations, proposed terms unacceptable to Stephen's representatives. This collapse further entrenched the divisions, perpetuating the cycle of warfare and instability as both sides prepared for a continued and bloody conflict. Matilda's fortunes improved significantly at the beginning of 1141. A pivotal moment occurred when Ranulph of Chester, a key northern magnate, had a falling out with King Stephen during the winter. leading Stephen to lay siege to Ranulph's castle in Lincoln. In response, Robert of Gloucester and Ranulph assembled a larger force and confronted Stephen at the Battle of Lincoln on February the 2nd, 1141. Despite initial successes by Stephen's forces, the battle turned in the favor of Matilda. Her cavalry, superior in numbers, managed to encircle Stephen's infantry. Intense fighting ensued, and ultimately Stephen was captured and dragged away to Bristol Castle, a secure location for high-ranking prisoners. Following this victory, Matilda moved to consolidate her position and prepare for her coronation, needing the support of the Church and a ceremony at Westminster. A crucial council was convened at Winchester, by Stephen's brother, Henry of Blois, acting as a papal legate. Matilda struck a deal with Henry, securing the Church's backing in exchange for control over ecclesiastical matters. Theobald of Canterbury, however, hesitated to endorse her as queen so hastily. A delegation was then sent to Bristol to negotiate Stephen's formal renunciation of his claim, which he conceded under the circumstances, not like he had much of a choice. By the 7th of April, 1141, the clergy officially declared Matilda as the rightful monarch, adopting the title Lady of England and Normandy. Despite her recognized status, her support among the nobility was not universal, and her planned coronation in London faced significant obstacles. Tensions in the city therefore escalated, culminating in a revolt on the 24th of June, forcing Matilda and her allies to retreat to Oxford just days before her intended coronation. Meanwhile, Geoffrey of Anjou took advantage of the situation by launching yet another invasion of Normandy, capturing significant territories and weakening Stephen's position even further. The ongoing conflict in England and Geoffrey's successors in Normandy began to sway many Anglo-Norman barons who feared the loss of their lands. The shift in loyalty was evident when Waleran of Beaumont defected to the Angevins to protect his interests in Normandy, bringing additional regions under Matilda's control. The breakdown of royal authority was also reflected in the minting of coins, which decentralized to local barons and bishops across England. This period marked a significant turning point in the Civil War, with Matilda gaining momentum and the political landscape becoming increasingly fragmented. After the devastating Rout of Winchester in 1141, Empress Matilda's fortunes dwindled, largely due to the collapse of her political alliance with Henry of Blois, Stephen's brother and the Bishop of Winchester. This alliance had been crucial, but it was fragile, breaking down over disagreements about the distribution of ecclesiastical positions and some broader governance issues. Just politics. You know what it's like. Well, the breakdown led Matilda and her loyal supporter Robert of Gloucester to initiate a siege at Winchester, aiming to consolidate their power by capturing the bishopric stronghold. However, Queen Matilda, Stephen's wife, yes, that's right, the other Matilda, mobilized a force with her key lieutenant William of Ypres and troops from London to counter the siege. And this time, they managed to encircle Matilda's forces, putting them in a dire situation. In a critical turn of events during the siege, Matilda decided to flee Winchester with a few close allies like Reginald of Cornwall, while the remainder of her forces stayed behind to cover her escape. And you know what that means. Well, unfortunately, in the ensuing chaos, Robert of Gloucester was also captured, severely weakening Matilda's military position. And although she managed to escape to the relative safety of Devizes Castle, the loss of Gloucester, her principal military commander, was a significant blow. The capture of key figures on both sides, Stephen and Robert, led to negotiations for a swap. The exchange thus took place in November of 1141. But there was no peace agreement. Queen Matilda rather refused any compromise that might legitimize the Empress Matilda's claim. Consequently, Stephen was reinstated as king, and Robert returned to Matilda's side. This period also saw a reaffirmation of Stephen's rule by a church council convened by Henry of Blois, which culminated in Stephen's re-coronation over the Christmas of 1141. Stephen, feeling revitalized by his release, then worked to consolidate his position. He successfully persuaded Ranulf of Chester, a critical regional magnate, to rejoin his cause, thereby gaining additional military support. Stephen spent much of the summer of 1142 retaking Angevin-held fortresses such as Cirencester, Bampton, and Wareham, which had been built or expanded during the previous year's Angevin advances. While Stephen was regaining ground, Matilda faced mounting pressure. In the fall of 1142, she was besieged by Stephen at Oxford Castle. The castle was robust, to say the least, surrounded by city walls and the river Isis, compelling Stephen to opt for a siege rather than a direct assault. However, just before Christmas, in a daring and desperate move, Matilda, dressed in white for camouflage against the snow, made a stealthy escape from the castle. Accompanied by a small group of knights, she crossed the frozen river and fled on foot to safety in Wallingford Castle, evading captures by Stephen's forces, who were unaware of her departure until she had reached safety. This bold escape allowed her to remain viable contender in the ongoing civil war, preserving her claim against Stephen. The ongoing conflict between Matilda and Stephen was marked by fluctuating fortunes for both sides. It wasn't easy for anyone involved. While Matilda had established a robust base at the Devizes Castle, where she secured the loyalty of local officials and knights who had lost their lands to Stephen, the broader conflict saw no clear victor gaining the upper hand. Throughout 1143, the tide seemed to turn slightly in Matilda's favor. Notably, Robert of Gloucester laid siege to Stephen at Wilton Castle in Herefordshire, a crucial point for assembling royal forces. The siege culminated in the Battle of Wilton, where Stephen narrowly escaped capture amidst a chaotic confrontation, showcasing the prowess of the Angevin cavalry once more. That same year, Geoffrey de Mandeville, the Earl of Essex, declared his rebellion against Stephen, using the Isle of Ely as his stronghold. His strategic movements towards Cambridge signaled a potential threat towards London, escalating tensions in the region. Meanwhile, Ranulf of Chester also renewed his rebellion in the summer of 1144, further complicating Stephen's military challenges. Back in Normandy, Geoffrey of Anjou capitalized on the disarray in England. By January 1144, he had secured control over southern Normandy and captured Rouen, the ducal capital. His successful campaign concluded with recognition from Louis VII of France, who formally acknowledged him as the Duke of Normandy. However, Matilda's position in England remained precarious despite these advancements. The loss of Miles of Gloucester, a key military leader in late 1143, was a significant hit to her strategic capabilities. Furthermore, Geoffrey de Mandeville's insurgency faltered when he was killed in September of 1144 during a skirmish at Burwell Castle, diminishing the threat to Stephen's eastern flank. Stephen did manage to regain some momentum in 1145, notably recapturing Farringdon Castle in Oxfordshire, which was a strategic loss for Matilda. The ongoing stalemate led Matilda to authorize Reginald, Earl of Cornwall, to open peace negotiations in 1145. But the deep-seated enmity and mutual distrust between the factions meant that neither side was willing to make significant concessions. The protracted war continued to drain resources and destabilize regions, with both leaders unable to deliver a decisive blow to end the conflict conclusively. As each side managed to secure minor victories and suffer setbacks, the broader landscape of the Civil War remained one of devastation and deadlock. By the late 1140s, the civil war in England between Matilda and Stephen had largely ground into a stalemate, characterized more by politics and sporadic skirmishes rather than large-scale battles that had marked the earlier stages of the conflict. In fact, many of Matilda's staunchest supporters, like Robert of Gloucester and Brian Fitzcourt, passed away during this period, which further weakened her position. Additionally, the announcement of the Second Crusade drew several key followers away from the region, further depleting her resources and capabilities. During this time, Matilda's eldest son, Henry, began to take a more prominent role in the conflict. Initially remaining in France, Henry ventured into England in 1147 with a small but skilled mercenary force. However, this expedition failed, not due to the skill of the fighters, but financial difficulties. And here's one for you. Stephen actually ended up paying off Henry's mercenaries, allowing him to return safely to France, though his motivations for doing so remain unclear. But one can't blame the mercenaries. I mean, take the money where you can get it, right? In 1148, Matilda chose to return to Normandy, partly due to the ongoing disputes with the church. She had been occupying Devizes Castle, which was legally owned by Jocelyn de Beaune, the Bishop of Salisbury. Pope Eugene III intervened on the bishop's behalf, threatening Matilda with excommunication if she did not immediately relinquish control of the castle. Matilda delayed her response as much as she could, but eventually she packed her things and left for Normandy, leaving the castle under Henry's control, who then continued to stall its return for as long as possible. Once back in Normandy, Matilda re-established her court in Rouen and shifted her focus primarily to the administration of her Norman territories, rather than continuing her fight in England. She settled into a life of relative quiet in the priory of Notre-Dame-du-Pré, engaging in the local affairs and preparing her son's future endeavors. Geoffrey of Anjou, Matilda's husband, died unexpectedly in 1151, leading Henry to claim his inheritance of the family lands in Anjou. Henry's subsequent return to England in 1153 marked another turning point, with support from significant barons and minimal appetite for further conflict from both sides. The church-brokered truce was finally established. This peace agreement recognized Stephen as king, but named Henry as his adopted son and successor. Stephen's death in 1154 allowed Henry to ascend to the English throne, marking the end of the prolonged civil strife. Henry's coronation, which used the grandeur of the two imperial crowns Matilda had retained from her time as empress, symbolized not only his legitimate succession, but also the eventual resolution of the conflicts that had plagued Matilda's later years in Normandy. With Henry's succession, the instability and challenges Matilda faced in Normandy diminished, bringing a degree of peace and stability that had been elusive during her time as a claimant on the English throne. Throughout her later years, Matilda continued to play a significant role in the governance of Normandy, often acting on behalf of her son, Henry II. She was instrumental in managing and resolving the various land claims that emerged during the period of conflict and instability that had marked her earlier attempts to claim the English throne. Together with Henry, she issued numerous charters that helped stabilize governance in both England and Normandy, underscoring her continued influence in political affairs. She also took an active role in diplomatic and ecclesiastical matters. She intervened in the dispute between Henry and his Chancellor Thomas Becket over the codification of the English customs and church administration, offering measured advice that reflected her deep engagement with the issues at stake. Her diplomatic acumen was further demonstrated in her handling of international issues, such as the dispute over the hands of St. James' relic with the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick I. She also successfully negotiated to keep the relic in England, which not only pleased the English clergy and lay pilgrims, but also enhanced her standing as a skilled diplomat. Furthermore, her involvement in resolving a diplomatic conflict with Louis VII of France over crusading funds in 1164 shows her capability in handling sensitive international negotiations. Thus, her later years were also marked by a deeper engagement with religious affairs and her personal faith, although she never fully withdrew from political life. Matilda's relationship with her children, especially her youngest son William, to whom she was particularly close, also defined her later years. Despite her more relaxed demeanor in old age, contemporaries and chroniclers still noted her formidable character, reflecting her enduring legacy as a determined and capable ruler. Matilda's life came to a close in 1167 on the 10th of September in Rouen, after which she was generously remembered for her contributions to the church, to which she bequeathed all of her wealth. Her final resting place was initially the Abbey of Bec-Hellouin, where she was buried under the high altar in a ceremony led by Rotrou, the Archbishop of Rouen. Her tomb bore an epitaph that eloquently captured her significance. and it read thusly: Great by birth, greater by marriage, greatest in her offspring. Here lies Matilda, the daughter, the wife, and the mother of Henry. Well, thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed. We've done a few famous women lately, haven't we? Which is good. I would like to thank my top tier patrons. That is Tim, Britt, Wendy, Charles, Jeffrey, JC, and Stark Factory. Thank you for supporting the channel. And thank you for listening this far. If you have listened this far, leave your comments. Tell me what you think about Empress Matilda. And I will see you next time. Good night, everyone.